It was also discovered that this site had been ranked rather low in the ranking until EPD had asked the consultant to give the Taylor County site 25 extra points for public participation. Several months later, the Georgia Supreme Court ruled that the application or the invitation to the facility had been made in violation of the Open Meetings Act, that the Taylor County Commission had met secretly in violations of the State Open Records Act in deciding to invite this facility in the county. So at that point, everything was thrown out again, and the governor invited people to reapply. Well, this time I think most counties had done their homework and found that it wasn't such a good thing, and maybe 4 applied the next go-round. One of those counties was Warren County. They also had an open record challenge.
Taylor County Commissioner Billy Amos, however, maintains that the county did not violate the Open Meetings Act.
We voted on accepting the application in July of '87 at a special call open meeting, which our clerk failed to record in the minutes. And we had been handling all industries that way. We hadn't recorded them and never had any problem, but unfortunately we did with this one, so suit was filed against us for violating the Open Meetings Act.
With the original application thrown out, the Taylor County Commissioners immediately reapplied to place the incinerator once again in Taylor County. This time, even though there was an open meeting, would-be participants were discouraged from voicing objections. Marie McGlawn, whose family dates back 175 years in Taylor County, recalls what happened when citizens opposed to the incinerator tried to be heard at that meeting.
The 5 commissioners would not listen to us under any condition. So we stood there and insisted that we do be heard, but there was no way they would listen to us. So finally, to the point that Mr. Amos and Mr. Neely especially was agitated and said to me, which we have photographed, sit down and hush. And then we continued on and trying to be heard, and finally said to the sheriff, do something. If you don't, do something, told the sheriff. In the meantime, the sheriff hadn't done anything. But at that point, he did go to the microphone and tell us that if we didn't sit down and get quiet, he was going to arrest us all, which was about 200 people, I would say.
7th-generation Taylor County resident Buddy Galtney, who owns the town of Butler's gas station and hunting club, reacted this way.
Well, sir, when we first heard that it was coming in, of course, we thought, well, industry, trade, business. But then when we started finding out what went along with an incinerator and all the dangers to the environment and the people, then we quickly switched over. In my opinion, the general citizenship is against having the poisons come in here. The only people that are vocal in support of it are the people that stand to gain from it financially.
Again, the state received applications, and this time the consulting firm ranked Warren County the #1 site for the incinerator and Taylor County #2. However, the Hazardous Waste Management Authority still decided to select Taylor County as their choice to host the facility. With that, the citizens organized to try and make their concerns known to Governor Harris. Taylor County resident Terry McCants helped found the group called Citizens for Safe Progress.
And so we got together and we organized, and then we formed different committees to lobby, to write letters, to make telephone calls, to do all these things, kind of a think tank to come up with ideas on ways to combat the state and the county commission in citing this thing, or trying to cite the thing here in Taylor County. So it was, as I said, a grassroots organization, and we're still learning. We're still learning things every day that help us.
Despite these efforts, Taylor County citizens were unable to establish a dialogue with Governor Harris.
A couple of years ago, I'd spent about 3 months just doing work on hazardous waste incineration, and then I compiled it in a form that was easily readable and handed it to the governor one day in the halls of the governor's office, and it's the first time I'd ever met the governor. He did not know me, and I was very polite. I handed it to him, and he said, "I know all this. You can't tell me anything I don't know about this." And clearly, he did not know any of that. A lot of it was very new information, and if he'd known any of it, he wouldn't be going forward with the plans to build this incinerator. So he's had a completely closed mind. At the last Hazardous Waste Management Authority meeting, the people of Taylor County got up and told the governor the kinds of things they've been trying to tell him before that he has closed his ears to. He literally, at that meeting, put his fingers in his ears. I think that sums up completely the mentality of the governor of Georgia and the Environmental Protection Division. They do not want to hear the truth.
The state's next move was to have the Hazardous Waste Management Authority meet to discuss condemning 3,000 acres in Taylor County. Once the state owned the land, it could proceed with plans to build the incinerator. If not built, the land would still belong to the state. As it turned out, the residents of Taylor and Talbot counties packed that meeting to oppose the land condemnation and the incinerator.
And they're going to bring it to our backyard, and it shouldn't be in anybody's backyard. Right. We don't need it. There are other options. You told us that the federal government said you had to have this facility, and that is not true, Governor Harris. We have to have a plan to manage our hazardous waste. We do not have to have a hazardous waste incinerator. We have to have a plan, and that is all. And we think the plan should be source reduction, recycling, and it should be some other thing than incineration.
Now I would like to read to you from Psalm 58 in the Living Bible, verses 1 through 5. Justice, you high and mighty politicians don't even know the meaning of the word. Fairness, which of you has any left? Not one.
Why is it that you set up a technical advisory council to the authority in 1982 and it's never met? Why is it that there's a subcommittee that's supposed to coordinate what we do with everything else in the region? We can't find any minutes that the subcommittee ever met. And we will pass over the comedy here, stuff like, because of the economic growth potential associated with the facility, numerous counties are interested in serving as the host community. We'll let that go by. That's why we're here today.
No facility. No.
We're having a meeting right now, like it or not.
No joke. No joke. No joke. No joke. No joke. No joke.
Jack McLawn lives near the site in Taylor County.
The people in this part of the state generally do not question, whether the government is right or wrong or whatever. We have always been taught and learned in school and brought up to think that the government would look after us and would do what was right. And so when this thing started, certainly we thought that after we made the government realize, and the governor realized that these territories were not in ecologically and good place to put such a facility, that certainly, that they would make studies to change these things. But as it turned out, he has refused to talk to anybody from the beginning of this whole matter. And the people that went up there and had to force themselves upon that, it was done out of a whole sense of frustration and belief that that we do live in a free country.
There are good reasons to be concerned about health risks posed by incinerators. Quite simply, they're designed to handle substances such as oil, paint sludge, acids, pesticides, and PCBs. Debbie Buckner is a health educator and has been researching the health dangers associated with incinerators.
I think it's interesting that in all of the public hearings that I have attended concerning the hazardous waste incinerator, I have made it my point to ask every time if I could have a list of the hazardous waste incinerators in the nation that are operating and have not had an environmental citation or have not had some kind of health problem associated with them. In the last 19 months, I have yet to get a list of incinerators that meet either of those two criteria, and I have not had any of my research turn up a safe incinerator. So I go on the assumption, following my research, and that it is an undeniable fact that burning of toxic materials and chemicals are going to cause us some health problems.
Mark Swecker heads American Combustion, an incinerator company, and acknowledges that there are risks involved with hazardous waste incinerators.
Products of incomplete combustion are the issue that if you burn something incompletely, there's always a risk that as those gases cool down, that these incompletely burned molecules will recombine to produce products of incomplete combustion. And what has been shown is that these are chemicals that were not even in the waste stream before. These are new chemicals. And unfortunately, some of the products of incomplete combustion are very hazardous material.
It's been hard for Taylor County residents to obtain accurate information from state officials.
We were also told that in the very beginning that the only thing that would be emitted from the incinerator stack would be carbon monoxide and steam. And of course, since then we've learned quite a bit about this thing and realized that they do not have any way to measure dioxin, which is a byproduct of burning PCBs. And of course, in one of our original meetings in talking about PCBs, we were told by the state official that came down here that PCBs were not dangerous. And so I'm under the assumption that PCBs are dangerous. And so it really shocked me that they were trying to cover these things up and soft play all of the bad problems that were coming here.
What we have found is that there is no way to control the emissions that are going to come from this incinerator. Dioxins and furans are going to be created as a part of the incomplete combustion process. They're going to go out of the stacks. We do not even have the technology to monitor these emissions, much less to control these emissions. At other facilities around the country, heavy metals have been emitted, lead, carbon dioxide, which is one of the problems we're having with the greenhouse effect. Tremendous amounts of that is going to be released. What we found is that hazardous waste incineration is not the way to manage the state's hazardous waste. What we are terribly afraid of is that this incinerator facility is going to perpetuate the production of hazardous waste, and that's the last thing we want to be doing.
Perhaps the experience of another town with a hazardous waste incinerator can help explain the fears of Taylor and Talbot County residents. The town of Hudson, North Carolina was host to the Caldwell incinerator.
I called Hudson, North Carolina, and talked with a dairy farmer by the name of Hewitt Tross, and he has had to get rid of his dairy farm that has been in his family for 100 years or more. His wife has a respiratory problem and will have to use a respirator the rest of her life. His water, his soil, and even the air, because they took air samples off of the leaves of the trees, is contaminated with heavy metals such as lead, mercury, other kinds of heavy metals, and PCBs and dioxins. People in Atlanta would be interested in knowing that as these gases and the acids and the heavy metals attach themselves to the gases and leave the stack, they, depending on atmospheric conditions, they can travel hundreds of miles. And depending on those atmospheric conditions, they can change their molecular structure into something that could be even worse than what came out of the stack originally.
The same figure as far as the 99.99% safety factor was also used in North Carolina for their incinerator. And of course, eventually they had to close the incinerator down. Recently I saw a tape about problems of things in North Carolina, and you could have easily plugged in the Taylor County. They tried to say that it was completely safe, and they was saying it was our patriotic duty to take hazardous waste and all that sort of stuff, and it is just one big con game.
Exxon said exactly the same thing. He was 99.99% certain that there would never be a spill, and if there was a spill, they had all the capability to clean it up. That's exactly what we've been told. We don't believe it any more than those people in Alaska believe it now.
The burning of these wastes is not the end of the cycle. The ashes remain and are highly toxic.
Basically what happens by choosing to continue to rely on treatment technologies is that you're not ending the pollution into the environment. You're basically taking that pollution and instead of putting it in the ground where it's going to contaminate our groundwater, you're putting it in an incinerator where it's contaminating our air. So you're shifting that waste from one pollution medium to another. The best method of dealing with hazardous waste is not to generate it in the first place. We are fundamentally opposed for that reason to off-site recycling and treatment. It seems that whenever you generate this waste, no matter what you do with it, there is some form of pollution that enters our environment.
The selection of Taylor County has come under fire for another reason. If built, the incinerator will sit over one of the state's largest aquifers and water recharge areas.
One of our concerns is the threat of groundwater contamination. Groundwater contamination has occurred at several of these incinerators around the country, including the incinerator that is considered to be on the cutting edge of incinerators, the Cadillac of incinerators. And contamination can occur as a part of the transportation process, as a part of the above-ground storage, the unloading of hazardous materials, things like that. The real special area of concern right here is that the proposed Georgia incinerator is in Taylor County, and that site lies above the Cretaceous Aquifer, which is the source of drinking water of all of southern Georgia and northern Florida, and we just cannot afford to jeopardize that precious resource.
I went into the EPD office to check on the amount of the chance of our groundwater at home being contaminated, and the hydrologist in EPD said, "Oh, you don't have anything to worry about for at least 15 years." At which point I promptly lost my cool and said, "But it's been clean since creation, and we'd kind of like for it to stay that way longer than 15 years. So we're talking about the chance of explosions, groundwater pollution, air pollution, soil pollution, and of course getting into the food chain. And that will affect not just Talbot and Taylor County, but the entire state of Georgia.
With a central incineration facility, hazardous waste from surrounding states would be transported by truck or rail to the main site. It is that activity that threatens human life in hundreds of communities.
The issue with hazardous waste in my mind is transportation. You know, and it's not just hazardous waste, I mean, it's all the raw materials and the trains and whatever. The greatest risk to the environment is accidents related to its transportation. And, you know, the potential releases from turning over a 6,000-gallon tanker of a waste next to a stream while it's being transported down the road, you know, is several orders of magnitude greater risk than anything that comes out of that incinerator. And, you know, it's just something that we overlook. This material was once a raw material, and it's being transported in trains and trucks and being moved from one source to another. You have vapors that escape as it's being moved. You have tanks while it's sitting in industrial plants where the material is leaking. You know, we have a constant release of these types of materials into our environment.
The route many trucks would take in Georgia is State Highway 19. This road bisects the city of Atlanta as it heads south into Taylor County. In many places, this is only a two-lane road that farmers use, or the main street of a town. Many of these rural communities lack the technology and the equipment to handle spills of hazardous chemicals on their roads. Jim Huff, a resident of Griffin in Pike County, feels he has good reason not to want hazardous waste transported on this road. All county schools are congregated on one strip of Highway 19. And he has worked to pass truck restrictions in counties these trucks will pass through.
We're now standing in front of the 3 high schools in Pike County, which is adjacent to the main north-south route of transportation of the toxic waste from the north of Georgia all the way to the site. This will be one of the main arteries that the trucks will go through to get to the Taylor County site. The restrictions we've tried to get against the trucks have been to protect this high school, middle school, and grammar school. Probably 98% of the children could be hurt or killed if there was an accident in front of this, in this proximity. Now last week we had two trucks collide just south of the schools, where a DOT truck and a tractor trailer collided and both burned. If these would have been, one of these would have been hauling toxic waste, we would have had a major catastrophe. As you can see, the wind is blowing pretty stiff today, and all our charts are based on a 5-mile-an-hour wind. which would hit the school with the fumes in less than 1 minute and 30 seconds. If the wind was blowing like it is today, we probably wouldn't even get that much time. There is no emergency exit from these schools. The only entrance and exit from the schools is Highway 19.
Captain Robert Kirksey, the Pike County Fire Chief, would be the one to respond to any chemical spill.
At the present time, I don't feel that we are adequately equipped and staffed to handle any emergency that would, should it occur here on 19 or in the county. It runs right in front of the school, and the only way in and out is from 19. So if there was one in that area, you know, it would be a bad situation.
The counties along this route are unprepared to deal with the sheer number of trucks that will use this route. If a central facility is built, the traffic of trucks hauling hazardous waste will increase substantially.
The people in both counties were really not aware that the site was going to be in Taylor County due to the conflicting news reports. And once they found out the volume of tractor trailers, which we set at a minimum of 5,000 to come down this route, just dividing the state into 4 quadrants, they were appalled at the number of trucks that would be coming down day and night. Now that would just be to handle what Governor Harris says is going to be the waste processed at the site. That would not count any waste coming from out of state, which with the closing of a mill and the restrictions placed in South Carolina, which in South Carolina they're handling waste from 40 states and 8 foreign countries, that would either double, quadruple the amount of waste being hauled north to south, which would be the main corridor since most of the waste is generated above Atlanta.
As everyone knows, trucks sometimes have accidents. A recent hazardous materials spill in Talbot County upset residents, not only because of the risks posed, but they felt that the facts were concealed from them. Mike Buckner lives in Talbot County and remembers a recent accident.
The last of December, we had an accident, Rebecca, right at the site, 1 mile, I think, from the proposed site. And Mr. Gautner was kind enough to go up and scoop up some samples of what the spill. And we had it analyzed, and it was not even what was labeled on the truck. And it took these people 6 hours to get down there. And they reported on the news that night that there was no injury and no spill. Yet there's something out there on the shoulder of the road today that has not been cleaned up, and it is draining right into the Flint River.
December the 14th or 15th of 1988, and what happened was a log truck and a tanker hauling acetic acid got tangled up about 4 miles from the site for the incinerator, and in the accident the driver of the log truck was injured. The tanker truck did leak some chemicals there on the roadside. On December the 8th, the site had just been approved by the Hazardous Waste Management Authority in Taylor County, 3 miles from where the accident occurred, and all I can assume is that they didn't want to forewarn people or give them a preview of things to come.
Contrary to what state officials have said, having a hazardous waste incinerator in your community is not the way to attract other industry. Even jobs created by the facility itself will be technical ones, and therefore largely unattainable. T.C. Saunders lives 2 miles from the site, and he has doubts about working there as well.
Probably will bring jobs, but like I said, there's no one been trained to work at a facility like that. That's my philosophy. You have to have people that really know what they're going into. If you go at a job and not trained, you're not going to do a good job there. That's why we don't want it.
We have looked into the aspect of jobs and economy that'll be promoted by this facility, because that's one of the things that the governor first used to attract these poor rural counties to adopt or invite the incinerator to site in their areas. And what we found in looking around the country is that these incinerators and hazardous waste disposal facilities do not attract quality industry. You look at Emile, Alabama, the unemployment rate there since a hazardous waste disposal site has been located there has increased by 234%. That's unemployment. One of the hospitals has had to shut down. 7 industries have moved away. good, big industry or environmentally compatible industry does not want to locate in an area where you've got a hazardous waste facility because they don't want to subject their employees to the hazards that it involves.
And when asked what kind of industry the proposed incinerator has interested in moving to Taylor County, Commissioner Amos gave this reply.
One we're pretty sure we're going to close is the chemical industry.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure we'll get some flack on that, but there's nothing wrong with it. We're not going to put anything here to harm the people environmentally. We're not going to do that.
Clearly, there are costs and risks to building an incinerator to handle our hazardous wastes. The only sensible answer must be to reduce the waste that we generate, and we should then treat any remaining waste on the site it was produced to minimize the transportation of hazardous waste.
We have the capability to reduce hazardous waste production to zero, and zero discharge should be our goal. We do not have hazardous waste is just what it says. It's waste. It's waste that we can't use. And we have the technological know-how to substitute non-hazardous materials for most of the hazardous materials we use. Now, there might be some things that we don't yet have a safe alternative for. And what I say is we cannot, with a clear conscience, be producing that hazardous waste right now until we have the safe means of treating that waste or going to another process. We shouldn't be manufacturing it, and we can live without it. We aren't going to go back to the Stone Ages. We can keep our same level of comfort and standard of living, even reducing hazardous waste.
Eddie Reeves is a consultant for Water Technologies Limited and advises industries on how to reduce their waste for their economic and environmental benefit.
I would like to comment on the use of a hazardous waste facility and its hindrances to reduction. Again, I go back to the economics. If it's more economical to simply cart it away, then the thrust will be toward doing that and not doing on internal things. I would say on a short-term basis, it's probably beneficial, but not long-term. We have got to deal with a tremendous volume of waste, which has been reported at 7 billion pounds a year. And any way you want to look at it, that's a tremendous volume. So a low-cost, quote, disposal facility, in my own opinion, would be a hindrance to long-term reduction.
We already have the capacity to deal with over 99% of the hazardous waste that's generated in Georgia at the site of production. There are all sorts of things that we can do to reduce hazardous waste. The Office of Technology Assessment says conservatively that we can reduce our hazardous waste production by 50% over 5 years. Well, if we implement that reduction program plus include our existing capability for hazardous waste treatment disposal, we don't need a new facility. In fact, we might find ourselves in 5 years not even using the capacity that we already have. And that's one of the problems with this whole process. The state is planning and has been planning for the last couple of years to build a facility, and they have not even shown that a facility is needed. No facility at all is needed, much less this huge $150 million facility.
One way hazardous waste can be treated at the site is by introducing chemicals or natural bacteria into the hazardous material to render it harmless. The process of using natural or engineered bacteria is called biodegradation. John Kroom is an environmental consultant applying biodegradation to wastes.
Biodegradation does mimic a natural process, and what we're doing is facilitating that process to happen more quickly, either by adding nutrients, correcting the pH, adding water, adding oxygen, or increasing the number of bacteria that are there attacking the substrate. Any organic material will most probably break down through time, but it may take tens or hundreds or thousands of years to do it. And biodegradation simply speeds that process up and compresses it. Cost for bioremediation or biodegradation, as the terms are generally synonymous, ranges anywhere from $30 to $60 per cubic yard, a savings of anywhere from 50 to 100%.